This is every difference you need to know between Minecraft Java and Bedrock Edition. Here's how to crawl through a half-block space. Now in Java, we're just gonna hit our head on the slabs. It's a roadblock. But in Bedrock, not only does the boat go through, but us along with it, which could make for a great secret entrance if your friends don't know this trick themselves. After all, we're going through a space even thinner than what a trapdoor would do. With the help of a golden block and a piston, we're able to completely break piglin bartering on Bedrock. With just a simple redstone clock like this, we can have a sticky piston push a golden block back and forth, and for some reason that completely messes with the piglin's AI, where they're now trading every single tick possible. But on Java, if you were to do this, you'd just be out a bit of redstone. It's more of a noise complaint than anything that's gonna fill your pockets. Creative mode not only looks different on Bedrock and Java, but it also plays different. Since the way the creative mode flight works in Java, you'll coast a little bit before coming to a complete stop. But in Bedrock Edition, that's just not a worry. You stop touching the input and you'll immediately stop moving. And oddly enough, it'll also automatically initiate creative flight if you do things like move too quickly. In both Java and Bedrock Edition, shulker boxes can be used for secret entrances, just in different ways. See, in Java Edition, we're able to use a shulker box placed vertically like this to then push us through and sink through the floor. And then in Bedrock Edition, if you place a shulker box facing towards yourself and then open it up, the top part of the shell is going to push you through a wall, moving you horizontally. Curl fans have a weird difference between Java and Bedrock, since in the Bedrock Edition, when you place them horizontally, they're only ever one-sided. But in Java, if you do the same, place it on the side of a block, and they'll be two-sided, poking out in kind of a V-shape like this. Yeah, I don't know why the difference exists either, but it's there. If you were to get a glass pane inside of your inventory in both versions, then you'll notice that in Bedrock, they have a 3D icon, while in Java, the glass panes use a 2D sprite, which could be a problem if you were to dye your glass pane, since a light gray stained glass pane is a lot more obvious in Bedrock than it's ever been in Java. In Bedrock Edition, if you were to get a name tag and name an armor stand dinner bone, it'll flip upside down like every other mob. But in Java, that just isn't the case, proving once again that armor stands are way worse on Java Edition than they've ever been on Bedrock. How is this piston powered? Well, in Java, there's a system called quasi-connectivity, and while it started as a bug, it's become something of a feature in this version. But since it was unintended, it's not planned for Bedrock anytime soon. The next time you're on fire, you might want to look for a candle, because while it won't help, in Bedrock Edition, it is possible to light a candle while your body's on fire. And the same also goes for campfires as well, which doesn't solve your problem, but it might kill two birds with one stone. Minecraft has plenty of rare occurrences to see, but that's apparently not consistent across all versions. So while it's impressive to find a zombie village in Java with a 2% likelihood, in Bedrock, it's a lot less rare. It's always the items that I forget to farm that I seem to need a lot of. And for all the different dyed blocks that I use, flowers can become a hot commodity. So if you're in the same boat and you just want a quick boost on orange dye or whatever you need, then this is an essential tidbit. See, in Bedrock, if you use bone meal on specific flour, then it'll spawn more of the same type nearby, letting us skip the frolicking and just focus on stockpiling. In a game called Minecraft, you're gonna be spending a lot of your time mining. I mean, what did you expect? So to speed up that trip in the caves, it's worth keeping this in mind. See, on Bedrock, it's actually true that if you click each block while mining it, instead of holding down the button, you'll mine substantially faster. And while that might seem like a marginal difference on a small job, this can really start to add up on a big project. And why does this happen? I'm not quite sure, but the same thing does happen in Java Edition's creative mode, so I guess it's a common enough problem. If we were to open up the book and quill in Bedrock, you'll notice that we can see 2 pages at once, while in Java, we're only seeing one at a time, which is a little more straightforward, but on Bedrock it actually feels like a book. And if only it was easier to type on console. If you watch closely, this squid's arms will start to move slower and slower. And why this happens is because, in Bedrock only, a squid's arms show how much oxygen it has left. So when 15 seconds pass and it's out of air in the tank, its arms will stop and it'll suffocate, which seems like a lot of effort to code for such a pointless mob. This here is called Invisible Bedrock. And if you can't see what I'm talking about, that's kind of the point. Now, this behaves much like the barrier block, except it's exclusive to the Bedrock edition of Minecraft, and it was originally used in the game to create these world boundaries around old worlds. But those world boundaries didn't go past build height, so if you just built up high enough, you could walk over it. Bedrock Edition is known for its fair share of bugs, and while some of those can be a pain, others are just cool to see. And this machine falls into that second category. As demonstrated with the perfect mix of timing and silk touch, we can grab a fully functional portal block item, which is great, but I'll add a disclaimer to just how awkward this is to pull off. And even after building the system properly, it takes the right amount of lag and luck to make it happen. But after all that, it is a neat souvenir. In Bedrock Edition, if you were to get a baby drowned mob to wear a mob's head, then when it equips it, that head will look ginormous. And there you go, you've got your own kind of a bobblehead in your world. And honestly, I don't know if you'd classify this as more silly or terrifying. I feel like it fits for both. Pets make for great companions, and thankfully in Minecraft, Minecraft, we're able to collect a few of our own, but keeping them alive is a different thing entirely, and more often than not, we just leave them at home to keep them safe. So to find that balance between safety and sidekick, Bedrock might have our solution. See, mobs over here behave pretty strangely when exposed to the right potions, meaning if we take a bunch of our pets, unload a ton of decay potions, and then heal them at the last moment, some will eventually enter into this bugged state, in which case isolate them and you've got yourself an immortal buddy. And sure, the methods might be questionable, but the results are hard to argue. When I mention water travel, you're maybe thinking of something like this, or this, but probably not this, which is unfortunate because it turns out that minecarts can be surprisingly fun to ride over the river. If you line the underbelly of a nearby lake with soul sand, then the bubbles provide a powerful enough stream to float our cart across. And hey, if you play on Bedrock, these bubbles don't break your momentum, meaning we can make a pretty fun roller coaster to ride through the roaring tides. So next time you're crafting, maybe switch out those 5 planks for some iron instead. To many in the community, the Aether Portal is something of a white whale to see, and I'm sure many of us were disappointed to see it fail like this when we tried. But with Bedrock, we might have ourselves a solution, or at the very least, a workaround. Apparently, when utilizing waterlogged stairs and blocks like so, we can strategically set up some floating water inside the glowstone frame. And then, even after we break the pistons and stairs, the water will remain inside our new Aether Portal. Just remember, it'll disappear once you reload the world. Minecraft's wolves have a very iconic look, and I would hope so since we only have the one breed to choose from. But if you find yourself in a position where you're looking for a change, this might have you covered. See, while we can't have different breeds, we can have different colors. In Bedrock Edition, it's possible to spawn a glitched out red wolf like so by using the tag onTame in the summon command, which is cool, but we can push it even further. See, if you then dye it a different color, the whole thing changes. And hey, the same thing happens with the subscribe button, meaning we can get a veritable rainbow of dogs to show off in our world. And it only makes me sad this doesn't happen in Java. If you put a zombie and a husk side by side, you'll notice that the husk is slightly taller. And in Bedrock, that's even more noticeable, since a husk can fit through a too tall gap in Java, but it can't in Bedrock. When you see a snowball, the last thing you're thinking of is fire. Though if we check a snowball through a flame, the projectile will actually ignite, and in Bedrock, it can even cause fire damage to mobs, making that snow golem a proper flamethrower. Here's why evokers are much scarier on Java than they are on Bedrock, since while they're not able to open up doors in Bedrock Edition, in Java we're not as lucky, which makes these illager mobs a lot more intimidating for us and our villagers. Speed bridging is a big deal for the PvP community, and while it's a big skill to place blocks like this on Java, on Bedrock it's possible to place blocks without sneaking to the edge, and that'll even allow us to speed bridge on a horse for some reason. You can't see it, but there's invisible pistons here, and the way we did that is using a bug that's in Bedrock Edition, since if you play on this version, you can make a piston invisible by breaking it while it's being powered by a repeating redstone clock. And then when you add back in the blocks and break the clock, it can still function like a regular sticky piston, which I'll admit would make for the coolest hidden base of the game if unfortunately it didn't reload as soon as you log out of the world. But still a cool glitch to experience while you're in it. Redstone and water don't mix, or at least that's what we think on Java. But if you place any of these redstone components in a lake on Bedrock Edition, it'll work just as they do on the surface. Why does the water look so gross on Bedrock? Well, it's supposed to be that way, since in Bedrock the water will look different with its color and tint depending on which biome it's in, whereas in Java the water changes colors depending on the body of water, whether it's a cold ocean or a warm one. If you're playing Bedrock and you push a chest into a shulker, this happens, which is an odd sight for sure, since in Java we can't even push the chest in the first place. So if you want to create an abomination, you're gonna have to stick to Bedrock. Here's why the Elder Guardian's worse on Bedrock Edition than it is on Java. Since in Bedrock Edition, you'll instantly get the Mining Fatigue 3 effect to any unafflicted player that's within its range. But in Java, if you were to drink something like a milk bucket, you'll at least have 1 minute afterwards where it won't give you that potion effect, making it a lot more possible to break into the Ocean Monument. If we were to feed our mobs these different items on Bedrock, you'll notice that each different food has a different particle effect as a result. While on Java, it doesn't matter what you're feeding them, you're not going to see any difference. If you go to name an item in an anvil, it'll have an italicized name, which is a dead giveaway. But on Bedrock, we can use the secret Unicode character to fix that, which offers up some solid pranks for sure. Structure voids are a weird block, and on Java, they aren't very useful to us builders. But on Bedrock, we can use these structure voids almost the same way as barrier blocks, except we can walk through them, allowing for some pretty neat build hacks. In Java Edition, we're able to cook our stuff in a furnace using wool, bows, carpet, and ladders. But none of those can be used as fuel in Bedrock Edition, which is a shame, especially when you could build a carpet duplication machine like this and smelt a lot more stuff on Java. Steak does not exist in Bedrock Edition, which begs the question, what happens if you cook beef? Well, perhaps unsurprisingly, in Bedrock Edition only, if you do this, you're left with an item called cooked beef, whereas in Java, it's called steak. If you were to look at the sun in Bedrock, you notice a temporary blindness come across your screen, but in Java, Java Edition, we can stare at the sky as much as we want, even if it burns. Pistons behave pretty differently between Java and Bedrock, because in Java, if you deactivate them, they pull back instantaneously. But in Bedrock, there is a delay to their deactivation, which is a pretty noticeable difference when you try to build a system like this. And it probably is why a lot of your redstone systems from Java don't work in Bedrock and vice versa. Most of us know the Easter egg to turn mobs upside down, but did you know that that works for us too? See, if you play on Bedrock Edition and you're not signed in, you can change your name to Grum or Dinnerbone, and you'll flip around just the same. What's the difference between these two shipwrecks? Well, on Bedrock Edition, it's possible for a shipwreck to spawn made out of acacia wood, but you're only going to find it in that version, which I think means we can infer that all the boats made out of acacia wood are either still floating on Java, or that any boats made out of acacia wood were just doomed to sink and not worth building in the first place. But at least we can still craft an acacia boat this way. Ever since 1.9, Java's had it where you need to attack with a cooldown to be able to get the full strength out of your attack. But in Bedrock, that's not a feature that's added in, so you can spam to your heart's content and win the fight that way. In Bedrock, it's possible to hang levers off of floating candles, which sounds useless, but it allows for some really cool decoration when used like so. And honestly, it makes me bummed that we can't do the same for our Java builds. In Bedrock, it's entirely possible to tie your boat to the other end of a lead and drag the thing around. Why you would do this, I have no idea, since I'd rather just break the boat and carry it that way, but if you need to, I guess it works. And crystals can clearly do some wild things when you stack them together, but this is less obvious. See, in Java, they'd stack like you expect, but if you do the same and reload the world in Bedrock, it makes a much stranger pattern. If we were to put a trident inside of a dispenser in Bedrock, it's able to throw it if you power it, but in Java, it'll just drop the trident as an item, which is a lot less intimidating for sure. In every Java world, you're going to find 128 strongholds that spawn. That's it, no more nor less. But in Bedrock, things work differently, as a random amount of these structures can spawn, and they'll also spawn in a random way, meaning you might be able to get this site where two portals spawned right next to each other, which is cool, but it really feels impractical too. You should be careful pressing the jump button in Bedrock Edition, because while flying with an elytra, if you were to press the jump button again, it'll cancel out your gliding and you'll just be falling like that. Luckily in Java, the same doesn't happen, making it a lot safer. In Java, a spider jockey looks like this, but on Bedrock Edition, we have a whole bunch of other jockeys to choose from. In fact, there's up to 12 different variants in this version alone, which is a lot more terrifying. And I think this is a rare case where it's actually nice not to have a feature in Java. Crafting a boat in Bedrock Edition requires using a wooden shovel, which I suppose makes some sense. I mean, what else are you gonna paddle it with? But to a Java player like myself, no matter how long I look at this, it just looks wrong. Did you know that you can get infinite water from one water bucket? Well, in Bedrock, if you have a cauldron and you place your water source above it instead of inside, it'll fill up the same, letting us refill as many buckets as we want from underneath. If you got some soul sand and wither skulls, you can see this difference happen, because when we spawn in the wither on Bedrock Edition, the boss actually turns white before it spawns, which contrasts what we see on Java where it turns blue before it heals all the way up. And considering that the Bedrock version has way more health than the one on Java, I think we should take this as a white flag and use it for our surrender. Fire is usually a good enough deterrent to keep mobs at bay, or at the very least it'll keep me out of your house. But in Bedrock, zombies will pathfind through literal fire to get to a villager, and that's some serious dedication. Playing Minecraft at max render distance is a big flex, but that's a bit different between the two versions, since Java has a default max of 32 chunks, whereas Bedrock lets us play up to 96. Though in fairness, Java does have mods to increase this, might I add. In Java, we duplicate TNT like this, using slime blocks and dead coral fans, but in Bedrock, we duplicate TNT using nothing. It doesn't exist in the game. What if you combine the end portal with the nether portal? Well, it depends on the version. See, in Java, it'll just break the portal, but in Bedrock, it'll get a weird hybrid like so. But even if that doesn't break Bedrock's end portal, this does. See, if you place fences underneath both versions of portals, in Java, we can teleport just the same, but in Bedrock, we can only walk on top without teleporting. If you break this path block in Java, you're just gonna get a dirt block. By breaking that same path block using Silk Touch in Bedrock, then you're able to get the path block as an actual item, which in Java is only possible through the use of commands. In Java Edition, it's impossible for mobs to try and pathfind over rails, and you'll see as much from this example. But on Bedrock Edition, they tend to be a bit smarter. And here, they don't have to wait for a mob to push them over, they'll just chase right after you. So put your iron ingots somewhere else. The F3 debug screen is a useful tool to have, but unfortunately, it's just limited to us in Java, meaning anyone playing Bedrock can't use these shortcuts to see tool durability or chunk borders either, and I think that's unfair. In Bedrock Edition, if you were to position yourself inside of a composter with a piston over top, and then flip the switch to power it on, you'll notice that nothing happens. But on Java Edition, this actually allows us to get an X-ray glitch, which is a lot more helpful than just being smushed inside of a composter. On Java, many players have used shaders like so, but while Bedrock doesn't offer those, it does have the option for the ray tracing beta, and that RTX allows for mirrors and lights like so. And while while there's a difference between them, both are equally beautiful in my eyes. If you were to wear a creeper head in Java Edition, then the detection range of a creeper that you stand next to gets cut in half, meaning it doesn't recognize that you're a threat until you get much closer. And the same goes if you're wearing a zombie head next to a zombie and a skeleton skull next to a skeleton. But in Bedrock, you'll still want to keep your distance. The fire aspect enchantment is a great thing to have on your sword, and in just Bedrock, it's a great thing to have on your book, since an enchanted book can be used to ignite TNT and spark a flame on candles and campfires. Only in Java Edition are we able to get a turtle inside of a boat, because in Bedrock, it's not possible to get this mob inside of the boat, which would be a bummer if the turtles couldn't already swim in the water anyway. I think they're doing just fine. Did you know that creepers explode as lingering potions if they have a potion effect? Well, maybe not if you play on Bedrock, but on Java, if you give it a splash potion and then let it explode, it'll do just that. In Bedrock, it's possible to mine a furnace or an enchantment table without using a pickaxe, and the item will still drop, which is a bit confusing considering that they're made out of blocks that don't drop without a pickaxe anyway in either version. But I'm not complaining if it means I get to save the durability of my diamond pickaxe. In Bedrock, you'll notice that your baby horse has an extra step before it becomes an adult, because in this version only, there's a teenage phase between the two variants. But in Java, we skip through the awkward phase and just get to the point where we can actually ride them with a saddle. Have you ever pulled a mob around with a fishing rod? Well, it's fun if you get the chance, but for whatever reason, in Java, you can't reel mobs out of boats, but you can in Bedrock. Weird. Functionally, barrels aren't that different between Java and Bedrock, but when you try to craft them, that's where the difference sets in. Since in Java, the crafting recipe for these requires planks, but in Bedrock, you need sticks, which might be the reason why we're able to push these with a piston in Bedrock. They're just lighter. For a boat to work, it should be able to support your body weight. I mean, that's basic science. But in Bedrock, while we can sit in it just fine, we can't stand on top of the boat entity like we can in Java. Weird. By using a dispenser, we're able to attach the heads of different mobs on top of villagers. And that's because in Java, they're able to wear armor. But in Bedrock, not so much. Since again, that's an old piece of dormant code that was never planned to be added into Bedrock anyway. The bad omen effect is not something I'd recommend getting often, but when you do, pay attention to how it happens. Because while it functions like any other effect in Java, in Bedrock, it'll have an animation similar to the Totem of Undying. In Bedrock, it's possible to get different colored shulkers by interacting with a dye of your choice, which I should add is technically possible in Java, but it requires using a complicated scoreboard command to change its team. In recent updates, dispensers are a lot more accurate in Java than they are in Bedrock, and that means that anything that you shoot out of a dispenser in Java doesn't have the randomness present that we see in Bedrock, and a comparison like this makes that quickly noticeable. Impaling is a weird enchantment, because while it's meant to apply extra damage to underwater mobs, in Java it doesn't work on drowned, since they're classified as undead, and thankfully Bedrock cleans this up and the enchantment works on any and all mobs that are underwater or under the rain. This skin is only possible on Bedrock Edition, since in Java, if you were to have transparent pixels in the first skin layer, it'll just turn them black instead. But in Bedrock, that's not the case, and the only requirement for Bedrock is that you have just one visible pixel, making for this perfect camouflage skin. Snow layers behave a lot differently in Bedrock when compared to Java, and with that, we can place snow layers and flowers in the same block, which is a weird sight, but a nice decoration. When you work with redstone, you're sure to notice that pistons can't push chests, or hoppers or furnaces for that matter, though for those on Bedrock, it's as simple as the flick of a switch, and frankly, that's what I'm jealous of. In Java, salmon looks like this, and in Bedrock, it looks oh so much bigger. And the reason for that is that in Bedrock Edition, there are 3 different sizes of salmon that you can find. But in Java, we just got the one. Cauldrons work very differently between Java and Bedrock, and while it's a shame for us, it's great for the Endermen, since you'll see that only in Java, they can take a bath without getting hurt in the water. And salmon isn't the only mob that got bigger on Bedrock, because if you type in this command, you're able to get a secret larger variant of the rabbit, which is actually how big the rabbits were supposed to be when they were added into the game. But it was scrapped, and now you can only get it through this custom command on Bedrock Edition. Needing Dragon Breath for tipped arrows can quickly get expensive. So as a simpler solution, Bedrock lets us make a whole stack of them from a potion cauldron like so. And hey, maybe Java would too, if there were potion cauldrons in the version. Armor stands are great for showing off, well, your armor, but what if you want to show off your items? Well, in Bedrock, that's as easy as putting it in the stand's hand. And unfortunately, Java doesn't do that by default. In both Java and Bedrock, parrots are able to dance. But in Bedrock only, if you get a parrot on top of your shoulder, it's still able to have a dance party up there, which is a lot more fun. And I'm kind of jealous that we don't have this on Java. In Bedrock, doors can be waterlogged like so, which is interesting, but it means that we can't make an air pocket like we can in Java. And oddly enough, I think that might be more useful than having a waterlogged door anyway. In these cauldrons, we don't have potions, but rather dyed water, because in Bedrock, it's possible to use different dyes within water sources to change the color of the water and then dye your armor. But in Java, yet again, the cauldrons are pointless. Now, if you were to get hit by a falling anvil, it's gotta hurt. And while that's true for us, it's not as much for the villagers. Or at least if you compare the two, in Bedrock, if you drop an anvil on a sleeping villager, it won't take any damage. If we're in survival mode, you'll notice that the range that we have for breaking blocks in Bedrock is up to 5 blocks, but in Java it's only 4.5, which is a small difference for sure, but it's quickly noticeable as soon as you need to branch mine. You've maybe seen this layout of TNT on Reddit or TikTok before, and for those who haven't, what happens here is that we trigger this redstone and then it explodes in a heart shape, but apparently only Bedrock users will be feeling the love from this one. Because the combat changes were never added into Bedrock, that also means that the Sweeping Edge enchantment is only available in Java Minecraft. But considering there's no cooldown for your sword in Bedrock, I think it's a fair trade anyway. If we were to cast a fishing rod and then zoom in, you'll notice that in Java, the fishing bobber is a 2D texture, but in Bedrock it's a 3D modeled cube. And why the difference, I'm not exactly sure. It seems like more effort to do the 3D cube anyway, but it does fit Minecraft a little better, so I think it's fair. In Java Edition, it's possible to light ice blocks on fire with a flint and steel, but in Bedrock, it's no use. So if you're hoping for a song of ice and fire, you're out of luck. Sorry. Did you know that creepers can dance? Really, any mob in the game can, since the play animate command exclusive to Bedrock makes it possible to play any animation in the game on a given mob, and the results can get pretty hideous. If you've ever broken a cobweb for one string, you're doing it wrong, at least if you're on Bedrock, since if you were to pick one of these up with shears and then uncraft it, you'll get 9 string instead of the one you would have gotten otherwise. While Java Edition no longer has the far lands, in Bedrock Edition, there does exist something called the stripe lands, which is that if you were to go 16,777,216 blocks in either direction, you'll eventually come across this special area where the blocks don't exist and half of them aren't even rendered, causing this weird effect. Render distance can make a world of difference, and it's one of the more clear benefits to playing Minecraft on a beefy computer. But it turns out on Bedrock, that draw distance is even more impressive. See, you might not have noticed, but with the way the game loads, we're able to stand at the main end island and see the outer islands within view, which I'll admit is a surreal sight. And it's made even more enjoyable by the fact that Bedrock handles render distance loading substantially better than Java. And I imagine this will make pulling off your next flying machine journey a lot easier to do, just as long as you don't fall off. Take a look at this axolotl here. Now, if we were to tie up the animal with a lead and then pick it up with a water bucket, then when we place it back down, it'll still have that leash attached. And the reason being is that in Bedrock, all of the NBT data is saved when you put the mob inside the container. So if you need another inventory slot, this is one way to bury the lead. You might not see it, but there's actually a bubble elevator here. Because in Bedrock, we can make a fully operational bubble elevator without having any water or sand nearby. To do this, we make our regular bubble elevator using soul sand water sources, then block out the water sources using powdered snow, and finally use an end portal to break the soul sand, which sure enough leaves this kind of airstream that still works. Why? No clue, but I'm not gonna argue with results. If you've ever made a mob farm, you know you're bound to get some pieces of armor mixed in with the results, which would be nice, but they're usually so battered that it just lasts little more than a few hits. Or that would be the case if we didn't try this. In Bedrock Edition, when we drown a zombie, you'll get its armor all fully repaired, meaning if you get one of these guys with a full set of armor, that'll save you 24 ingots, and you don't even have to craft it, which definitely means this is worth adding into your next zombie spawner. Villagers are a valuable asset to put to work in your world, but when you're moving them to the trading hall, it's clear that they're not going to be the most cooperative. And honestly, that's an understatement. So to more easily move these fellas around, it's safe to say that Bedrock has a simpler option. See, the way that minecarts work here, all we need to do is place a bit of railroad track next to their bed, and then when they're sleeping, we can roll by a cart and pick them up. And folks, while this might seem like kidnapping, it frankly is. But I'd venture that this is an ends justify the means kind of deal. And in my eyes, that's a good enough justification. If you watch closely, you'll notice that in Bedrock Edition, Steve actually blinks. But in Java, that's not the case for Steve, Alex, or any of the new skin variants added in. And thank goodness, it's pretty creepy to watch. This here is called a debug stick, and it's a useful tool for rotating and changing blocks around like so, almost functioning like a wrench for your creative mode. But unfortunately, it's a Java exclusive, for some reason. This mob is only in Java, since the giant was coded in before Minecraft's official release. But nowadays, it can only be spawned in using commands, and it has no AI. So it's really just a relic left in Java's old code. To this day, hardcore mode only exists in Java Edition, which would be a shame, but when you see how many ways there are to randomly die in Bedrock Edition, it makes sense. After all, I wouldn't lose 5 years of progress to a random glitch. That would just be too tragic to deal with. Have you ever wondered if sugarcane grows faster on sand or dirt? Well, apparently it doesn't matter. But it does matter whether you grow it in Bedrock or Java Edition, since in Bedrock only, we can bone meal sugarcane to speed up the growth. In Java, if you were to shear sheep that has colorful wool, the sheared sheep will just look like it has white wool. But in Bedrock Edition, the little scraps of wool that are left behind will actually still be the same color as the sheep, keeping that consistency. Leaves changing with the season has been a long desired feature from the Minecraft community, but at least in Bedrock, that's somewhat possible in the snowy climate. pigments, since when you leave out leaves in the snow like so, they'll turn white. This piston only exists in Bedrock, because as we can see from element X, we're able to summon in a special piston in Bedrock that's kept at a certain state, meaning that we have partially extended pistons, but only in Bedrock Edition. With the help of sand blocks, we're able to drop one of these gravity blocks above us and use that to walk through a wall. But that's only worth trying on Bedrock, since in Java, it'll just push you out of the way. In Java, desert wells look like this. Pretty basic, but on Bedrock, they couldn't leave well enough alone. And that's why you'll find twice as many desert wells that spawn on Bedrock. And there can even be times where 2 wells spawn instead of just 1, which seems like a lot for such a pointless structure. Fighting the Wither is no easy task, but in Bedrock, it's even harder, given that the Wither here has double the health of the Java variant, which seems brutal, but it makes that nether star that you get all the more worth it. If I were to get shot by an arrow, you realize that in Java, the arrows get visually stuck inside the player, but in Bedrock, we shrug them off and they're not a part of the model, which seems safer, but in both cases you're still getting shot, so maybe it's not that much better either way. Banners are so much better in Java, because over here, we're able to put them on shields, and also right-click them with the map to use as markers. Whereas in Bedrock, they're just what it says on the tin, a decoration, nothing else. This is a dolphin, and this is a baby dolphin, but you'll only find the baby versions of these mobs over on the Bedrock Edition, and the same goes for squids and glow squids. But considering you can't breed the mobs on either version, you can only find these by them spawning in. It's never fun to be poisoned, but even less so to be fatally poisoned, which is an effect exclusive to Bedrock. And while you'll usually see it if you feed a parrot a cookie, it can even kill undead mobs too, unlike real poison. In Bedrock Edition, it's possible to make a map with just 1 piece of paper using a cartography table, which is a lot cheaper than it is on Java, although you're not actually going to be able to see where you are in that map until you craft it with a compass, which in that way, the 2 versions are similar. This is what happens when we fall into the void in Java, but in Bedrock, the void is covered up by an invisible floor, meaning that we don't have to take damage anymore, which is good because in Java, we die to the void even in creative mode. In Java Edition, the Ravager mob only breaks leaves and crops, but in Bedrock, they're able to break leaves, all crops, and also other things like non-tree plants, mushrooms, and turtle eggs. Now, this might look like a tiny iron golem, but in Bedrock, this here is the new agent mob, which is a special entity meant to teach players how to code, because if you use the new implemented code builder tool, you can actually give it different sets of commands of what to do. So for example, we coded in this loop of text so that it now builds a bunch of these rings inside of the world. And you can even have it break and place blocks since it has its own 27 item inventory. And while you can see by this list that there's so much that this can do, unfortunately, it can't interact with levers or buttons. So it's still not a replacement for the copper golem, which honestly just feels like a slap in the face for Mojang. But with how many other things you can use to code from this, I guess that makes up for it. And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video. So see if they're right and have a good one, alright?